So thank you all for joining us for the How to Prepare for an Academic Job Talk workshop. Joining us today are Dr. Sarah Jordan, Ankur Parikh, and Jeremy Hoska. They will be answering your questions about how to prepare for an academic job talk. I'm going to hand it over to them for introductions, and then we're going to begin taking questions. So Dr. Jordan, would you please start us off?
Getting myself unmuted. Hi, I'm Sarah Jordan. I'm the Program Director for Couple and Family Therapy at UNLV. We have a master's program, and I've been a grad faculty fellow, and I am excited to be here today.
Hi, I'm Ankur Parikh. I'm a faculty member at Lee Business School. I joined UNLV in 2018. Before that, I was an assistant professor at Rutgers Business School. And I'm looking forward to interacting with you today and answering any questions you may have.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeremy Hoska. I am an alum of the Graduate College. I got my PhD in experimental psychology back in 2010. Subsequently, I got a tenure-track faculty position in psychology. It took me to Chicago. 3 years later, I went to New Jersey. And 10 years after getting my PhD, I'm an administrator back at my undergraduate alma mater. So looking forward to talking about teaching institutions, administrative interviews, and whatever questions y'all have.
Well, thank you all so much. So just to dive right in, let's start with the most basic question. How important is the academic job talk?
Okay, so I would, so I can kind of begin here. So I would say that academic job talk, so I've gone through this process a couple of times. And I would say that it's the single most important element of the visit. So basically you have a day-long visit at different schools. And in the academic job talk, so the two things which make it very important, the first thing is that you will have almost the entire department there and maybe even people from the school. So you may not get a chance to meet in person with every single faculty member. But during the academic job talk, you'll have a chance to kind of present yourself, your work to basically the entire department or the school. And the second thing is, so in for most of the positions, there's no teaching component to the visit. So there's no teaching interview kind of thing. So it also gives you an opportunity to kind of, and the department an opportunity to kind of judge your presentation skills, your teaching skills from the presentation itself. And lastly, it's basically, and they're also judging basically how you answer the questions. So how you handle the questions is equally important as your presentation. So I would say these things make it very important. And if anything goes wrong in the job talk, that's usually not a good signal. So basically, that's why I would say that it's a very, it's something that people remember through the day, basically. That's why I would say it's the most important element.
Thank you.
I can jump in. In our field, we have, for our job talk, we have a research component and a teaching demonstration usually. And sometimes there can be a clinical or supervision component. So depending on the program, they may ask for different things. Our interview tends to be 2 days long. And again, I think because we're therapists, and we're training therapists, we want a little bit more one-on-one time. So that tends to be the standard for our academic job talks. This is whether it's a teaching institution, research institution, but that tends to be sort of ours. I would echo it's the most important piece, and depending on the type of institution, if you're interviewing at a teaching institution, it would be your teaching presentation. I think a research institution, they want to make sure that you're fundable, that your research would be fundable at their particular institution in terms of internal and external grants. So there's some variation, I think, between fields as well as type of institution.
I won't repeat too much has already been said, but having interviewed at baccalaureate level institutions that are small liberal arts colleges or master's level state institutions, I've seen the gamut. I've seen hybrid job talks where you start out talking about yourself and your research and what you might teach. Or I've also had teaching demos and job talks completely separate. But regardless of how it's set up, the idea is this is really a critical performance task, not to put any more stress on y'all, but really it's looking at how people think on their feet, communicate with one another, and really having chaired search committees before. Really, what we're doing is an information gathering exercise to see if you're going to fit within our program in our department, and what you bring to the table, is that going to help us fulfill our goals. So there are other possibilities to convey this information in a one-to-one interview, in some of your documentation, earlier interviews, but this is really the culmination. So I think it's important to put your best foot forward, and we'll try to help you do some of that.
Great, thank you all. Next question. What are some of the things you should think about as you go to prepare for your job talk?
So I guess I can kind of add something to this question. So I would say, I mean, obviously it's a lot of things here are dependent on the field, how the job talk is structured and other things. But I mean, I can talk in terms of our field, let's say different fields in the business school. So our job talk is mostly focused on your main paper, your job market paper. So when you're applying for jobs, you have to identify one piece of research that you are that is the most important piece of work that you have done during your PhD, and we call that as a job market paper. And basically, the entire presentation is on that single research paper. And obviously, they are judging different things during the job talk, but basically, you're just presenting your most important and most thorough work, and you're answering questions from the audience. And I would say the presentation and answering the questions, they both combine to kind of give a full picture of what kind of researcher you are and what kind of teacher you would be, what kind of colleague you would be. So that's what I would say, kind of how our job talk is structured.
I would just say one of the things to think about is audience. And no matter what type of institution you be presenting at, no matter your disciplinary differences, do know that often your job talk will be an open forum in which the whole campus is invited, especially at small schools, right? So what does that mean? In the audience, you're going to have some specialists that know your research, probably in the program. And if you've done your homework, you know who those people are. So you'll be on your toes for that. But also you have to pivot and think about the students who may be in the audience, the faculty members who are intelligent, smart, and interested, but unfamiliar and able to convey your research and what you bring to the table to them. So I think that's just one thing to be really aware of and to rehearse if you can. So if you're working on your job talk within your laboratory or your program, that's one thing, but then also maybe presenting to some of your colleagues in the GPSA who will help you, identify areas that are unclear if they're not familiar.
I'm going to jump in. I apologize. My kids might be a little, hopefully you can't hear them too loud in the background, but I would echo the rehearsal. I think that's probably, well, there's lots of different parts that are important, but it was advised to me when I've been at 2 institutions. This is my second one, is to prepare the PowerPoint slides well in advance for whatever presentations you're going to do, and have several people look at them, for fellow students, faculty, your spouse, your partner, whoever. I mean, just lots of different perspectives, because something might be caught by your classmate that your faculty member doesn't get, or your partner might see something like, "Ooh, that color's too bright." It's kind of, it seems kind of strange, like things like font color and size would. But I've been to enough, have shared enough searches to see that even something little can just sort of already like, kind of take me back a bit. And then rehearsal, you want to be very natural. And I think a lot of times people think, oh, I know this literature, I know this study on the back, like the back of my hand. But when you get nervous and you haven't actually practiced how you're going to say the information, if you haven't rehearsed, it's noted. And if you have, it is noted as well. So my advice, the 2 times that I've interviewed, I've just sort of locked myself in a room once my PowerPoint is ready, and I just say it over, and I just talk to myself for an hour or 2 hours or whatever it might be, just so that I know the flow and it's really natural. Your audience is also important to consider. The students are watching too. If you just cater to questions and cater to the faculty and administrators, the students will pick up on that. And most programs receive some type of student feedback from the interview process. And I think that's very important. Be engaging. And I know for some fields it's more natural than others. I personally am a very engaging presenter, because when I go to a workshop, the best ones, regardless of the content, are, can they keep me engaged? I went to one yesterday. It was an online a substance misuse seminar. It was all virtual, and there was only one workshop where I actually felt like I was like there and really engaged, and it didn't even matter what the topic was. That was my favorite one. So I think that's really important to consider too, to keep your audience, little things like if you go to school, using that color background on your, anything that you can connect with your audience, just like you would with general public speaking, can be helpful. When you're presenting your findings, you want it to be clear to those that are not, if you're talking about research, or not researchers, but you want to talk down to your audience as well. So I think a good research presentation, for example, is one that really has a balance, where you're explaining it in a way that everybody knows that you know what you're talking about, and they can figure out what you're talking about as well. And then the same for teaching, very engaging, very clear. And be yourself, because it's a 2-way interview. You just have that natural feel and fit. It just sort of flows. And when you're having a good interview and you are yourself, and they get to see what you would really be like in the classroom or teaching a research lecture. So those would be kind of my points, I guess, to add.
Thank you. So speaking of that online conference you just mentioned, I wanted to consider this new reality living in now, and to see if you can speak a bit on some things we should consider and prepare for if we are conducting a job talk virtually, that might be coming up now, or if this type of platform continues.
Well, I'll just jump back in. Sorry again about yesterday. So there's lots of different ones. I can't remember what it's called, but it's the online platform where you get to take anonymous surveys. You get like a QR code or a link, and you sign in, and so you can say whatever you want and nobody knows it's you. And I think it's perfect for this platform, because it really, you've got your chat box, right? But everybody knows who you are, and this allows for you to just say whatever you want, ask questions, and be really engaged. And I think for teaching and for research, presentations, I just touched my screen here. You guys disappeared. To me, that was my favorite part, is she would ask a question, you would be, and I was even on my phone at that point, and I was able to put in my response, and then she would comment. What I have found most challenging in general about this is that I've talked to, I've done several presentations outside of our program where everybody's a name in a black box, and it's really hard to get the energy, I think, especially get it going in the beginning, if there's not as much interaction. So any way that you can interact, there you go, poll everywhere. That's a great one. I guess there's several out there, but that one is helpful. I do communication research, and one study that was done by my mentor showed she had different controls. One, a person is just talking into a audio recorder. This is old research. Another one, they were talking on the phone to someone and they were responding. And the third condition is they were face to face. And the research in her particular study, they found that the speaker needs feedback from what we call the addressee. So if you're all just black boxes and I'm just talking at the screen, I'm more likely to be disfluent in my speech than I am if I have even a visual of you all and you're nodding your head. You can be on mute. But that kind of feedback actually helps the speaker to be clearer. I do this a lot in class, but I think virtually it's even more so. If I'm talking to a classroom and they're all just like blank stares, I think, well, maybe I'm confusing. Maybe they don't understand, right? It's a little bit more challenging virtually, but I think any way that you can get some sort of interaction through a poll, through a chat, through anything like that, I think you'll find more energy, you'll be able to communicate more clearly, and you'll have better feedback and responses from your participants.
These are definitely good suggestions. I ended up getting a virtual job offer 7 years ago, so like before it was cool. And what I ended up doing was getting a tripod, getting my phone, having my wife behind the camera to keep me in a good mood and like I'm speaking to somebody, right? And I was in front of a classroom presenting a PowerPoint and trying to be interactive. Ended up getting the job offer from that. But I'm going to tell you, whether it's WebEx or Zoom, there are so many better tools at your disposal. I mean, you can share your screen, you can do some of the interactivity with Poll Everywhere. If you're on Zoom, you can do breakout rooms. And if you are in a teaching position or going for a teaching position, your facility and comfort with these types of tools will definitely set you apart. So consider that.
So I would like to add so a lot of great suggestions here. The only thing I would like to add here, what I've noticed, the difference between online and in-person presentations. So basically the question part from the audience. So the audience is not as forthcoming in asking questions as they are in the live seminar. So if you're in a live seminar, everyone is paying attention to you. There is a natural tendency to ask questions if you are in a live setting. So I think one thing which I've seen at some conferences is use of the chat box. So basically, people don't want to interrupt in the virtual thing. They want to interrupt less than in person. So basically, one way of kind of engaging them is basically just type in their questions in the chat box, and the speaker, so let's say it's an hour or hour and a half long, the full seminar, the speaker will stop every in those settings there is a moderator, so the moderator or the chair of the session will stop the presentation, let's say every 15 minutes, and will read out the questions, and the presenter will then answer those questions, and that gives a chance to kind of address all the issues every 10 or 15 minutes. And that also keeps the audience engaged. It's not just a one-way conversation. So I think that's another way is kind of people type in their questions, and basically you cannot obviously answer every question live as they're typing it in. So you stop every 10 or 15 minutes and just say that this is a good kind of point to stop and basically answer the questions that audience have till this point, and then you answer the questions and then you kind of move forward. So that's another way of, I guess, people are more ready to kind of type in questions than speak during the online. That's what I've noticed during the online thing. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I just received a direct chat here, and it asks, are postdocs mandatory to work in academia, and do job talks happen for postdoc positions or after that?
I can just say quickly, depending on the type of position you want, you may not need a postdoc. If you have enough publications or the type of you have enough teaching experience for the type of institution, you can go without one. In terms of The postdocs that I'm familiar with, colleagues and similar institutions, it has been pretty much behind the scenes interviews, maybe a research talk with the lab itself, not the full campus experience, but that could differ. So I'd be curious on what my colleagues have to share on that.
In our field in couple and family therapy, we don't tend to have a lot of postdoc positions, so I don't have as much experience with that. However, I would assume from going to other interviews of postdocs in my college or department, my previous institution, that the interview process would be pretty similar. We have a doc intern position in our program, and we don't have the funds to bring them to campus for an on-campus interview. But we do have them interview with the faculty. It's more of a conversational interview than it is a demonstration. So I think there could be a lot of variance between institutions and fields of study, perhaps.
So again, in our field as well, postdocs are very, very rare. So we have almost maybe like 1 or 2 schools that hire for postdoc and 100 plus schools. That's the ratio that are hiring for an assistant professor position. So basically so after you finish your PhD, you decide whether you want to go into academia or you want to go into industry, and you apply for, you apply for a lot of things in both academia and industry, or you just apply in academia if you're just interested in academia. But basically you just go for an assistant professor position, a tenure track. And sometimes basically we also have another thing, which is a visiting assistant professor position, which is an assistant professor position, but the contract is for 1 year or 2 years. Basically, it's a temporary position. So again, I don't have a lot of it, but I would assume, hearing from other people, it is very similar, but I would say that it might be a little bit less rigorous in certain aspects because you're going for a 2 or 3 year position, and sometimes you're applying for a particular position in a particular lab. So the advisor, your advisor, the person who is basically the faculty member who is basically kind of running that lab, that person is making the call of who they are going to hire, right? You're applying for a particular position in a particular lab, whereas in an assistant professor position, the entire department is going to. So I think that one faculty member or a couple of faculty members become very important in a postdoc versus, I would say, an assistant professor where it's like the department-wide search typically.
Thank you. Can you speak a bit on what the main components or sections of an academic job presentation are?
For ours, I shared a little bit before, we tend to have 2-day long presentations, 3 presentations, let's see. Yeah, we have 2 presentations and a demonstration, to be specific. So we have a research presentation, which I think is pretty classic among most tenure track or academic positions. Then we have a teaching demonstration. Well, I guess it's presentation / demonstration. And then we have a supervision demonstration where our candidate meets with our students and they present a live like clinical supervision case that's very specific to us. They are usually 1 hour each in length, spread out over 2 days. So that is in combination with meetings with the chair of the department, other administrative people, HR, the search committee, our students. I'm trying to think if those are all the meetings, like the clinic director, anybody that you want them to definitely have one-on-one interactions with and get feedback from. So ours are structured that way. I suddenly bumped my mute. I'm trying to think of other variations of what that might look, but I think an hour length as well as time at the end of that hour, like maybe 10 minutes for Q&A. So you would be on kind of presenting for most of the time. And then you leave time for Q&A. So like I said, I'm very interactive when I present at workshops and conferences. And when I do a job talk, it's very different because I'm basically talking for 45 minutes, 45 to 50 minutes. So I have to find creative ways to be interactive in that didactic component, which I think you can totally do. You can ask like a question here or there, or you can make references to things that your audience can relate to. But it's, for me, it's very different than going to a workshop where they're doing activities. And I would say the teaching presentation, they might do that. They may have people split up into groups and do like an activity that they would in a classroom setting. I guess a word of caution I would note is you don't know how many people are going to attend. I've seen job talks of 2 people. I've seen them of 50 people attending. So you have to really think, okay, if 2 people show up and I have this experiential activity to do for my teaching demo, what am I going to do, right? So how can it be adaptable? As well as you don't know the room necessarily that you're going to be in, and the AV and the space that you have and the configuration of the table or chairs. So I think, and as you plan your presentations, not just the order of things, but how can you be flexible? They're going to be looking for that. If you always are going to face a challenge in an interview, something doesn't work, the room's too hot, nobody shows up, something like that. How are you going to adapt? Because that gives them a really good idea of how you're going to handle stress and uncertainties in your job life. So.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that last point that was made, right? We want to see if you're not going to have presenter view on your PowerPoint, are you still going to be able to do a presentation in which you command the room, right? If nobody shows up, as was discussed, does that take the air out of the room? Or are you still interested and motivated to teach students or convey your research, right? So just, I think the thing to convey here is that you're always on, right? It's not just about having the research that fits their niche for the program and teaches the classes that they need, but really conveys who you are as a person, right? So in some fields and in industry, sometimes people take people out to play golf or do something that changes the schedule just to see how people react. Not saying people are going to sabotage where you're presenting or anything, but just, again, if you've prepared enough, if you've prepared your research talk to be as long as an hour with 10 or 15 minutes question, or if, you know, it's always going to happen where the schedule is thrown off a little bit, and guess what? Now your talk's 30 minutes. What do you do to present the key things, and so on? So I think it's just being adaptable in this whole thing, I think, is what I'd like to convey.
Yeah, so great points. So I would say, to add to this, in our field, the job talk, we only have one job talk, and it is basically an hour to hour. It can be as long as hour and a half. And the questions are typically continuous. So questions are not towards the end. So people are interrupting and asking questions all the time. So even before you start, like you're right on your first slide, you're trying to kind of talk about the motivation and so on, and people will just start because people have preconceived notions about what the topic is about, and they will start kind of throwing a lot of questions around and stuff. So that's one thing. So maintaining composure. So it's possible that you may get interrupted right at the beginning, and you have to basically come back from that. Like you answer the question and your flow is broken. So there's no concept of a flow. So you cannot really expect that you're going to get a flow of an hour of continuous talking as you are prepared. You can have interruptions all the time, tangential interruptions. So basically, you should kind of pivot back to your slides and your thought process. Basically, you have to kind of get back to your thought process from kind of answering questions and stuff. So typically, in terms of how we structure the job talk, so you want to basically start. So in our kind of field, I mean, we start with, you first obviously talk about the question that you're trying to answer, and then the motivation is really important. So why you are doing what you're doing, and where does your question fit into the broad literature? I would say these are the most important components. And many times, I mean, people will spend half of the time just on the first part of the talk. They won't even get to the results. They're just talking about basically what they're doing. And sometimes also a good idea to summarize your findings, because sometimes you may not get a chance to go over all the results. So it might also be a good idea to summarize what you expect and then what you find. And some people don't summarize, they just go on to the data and then the results and so on. But basically, it's your choice if you're comfortable basically summarizing your findings before you talk about every single finding. That's also a good way sometimes. So yeah, so that's basically the talk. So it's hour and a half, and you start with your motivation, then you go to the data if it's an empirical paper, and then you present your results, your main results. And sometimes it's also a good idea to have some additional slides after the conclusion. Let's say you're kind of, there are not many questions and you don't have, I mean, you kind of get through your presentation in half the time. You don't want to end in half the time. That won't sound like a good signal, because then you're done basically. I mean, you have nothing else to talk about. And so you may end, I mean, you can end 5 minutes early, I guess, but ending half an hour early won't be a great signal. So sometimes it's a good idea to have, let's say, 4 or 5 slides handy, maybe from another project that you can talk about. Maybe you don't want to just keep talking about a single project. So you may keep, let's say, 5, 6 slides about other cool things that you're working on. So you can just present the main results from other stuff you have done. So basically the idea is kind of getting back to your thought process. I think that's what I think is the challenging part, because people are asking questions all the time. So yeah.
I wanted to follow up on Jeremy's comment about you're always on. Not to put the pressure on. I think it's a little bit different virtually, because you're not like walking down the hall with people. You're probably not having dinner with them. But probably the most telling things that I've experienced with candidates have been at dinner, have been on the drive home. I had a candidate recently in one of our searches that it was after the dinner, and of course we're in Vegas, so I offer, driving the person back. And the person said to me, "Oh, my friends all flew in to see me while I was at the interview." And I was like, okay, well, it's Vegas. Yeah, they're just so excited if I move here. And just kept going. This person kept going on and on about, how excited she would be if she moved here. And then she said, "Oh, and they want me to stay up late tonight. And will you talk to," she literally handed me her phone. Said, "Would you talk to them and tell them I have to get up early tomorrow and present?" And as a therapist, I was so taken back. I was like, well, that's probably something, a boundary you should set yourself, but it was very eye-opening to me. And like I said, it's those comments. I had another candidate once said, "Oh, is this going to be where my office is?" And they weren't joking, like in a kind of, they were being serious. They wanted to know which office would be theirs. And so you don't want to be presumptuous. You want to be confident, but you don't want to be presumptuous. And this question about if you don't get the position, do you get feedback? That's a great question. People have asked me for feedback that didn't get the position. And it's tricky with HR these days. You have to be very careful about what you say and what you don't say. I think you could give some general feedback, like, we really enjoyed your research presentation. We really found it interesting. As we're picking this position, our committee is really, looking at a lot of different factors, being very vague, I think. But it is challenging, especially if I have feedback to give, like, let's say these 2 people I just described, it is challenging, because I don't want to say, well, when you said such and such, because it's not just that. And as a therapist, we know it's the whole thing. So that's just sort of like an indicator. And there were many other things with both of these people that, why we didn't hire them. But it's very tricky.
Thank you. So is it important to, at some point throughout the job talk, show that you know something about the university or the department, or is this better to keep this for a discussion during the one-on-one interviews with the hiring committee or the department faculty?
So I can chip in here. So I would say, a couple of things. First thing is research specific. So sometimes it might be a good idea. So let's say you have an audience, so you know your audience and they have worked in similar area. So it might be a good idea to mention that, let's say, Jeremy worked on a paper that I'm a related paper or something along that lines, right? So that basically helps in kind of connecting with the people in the audience and other faculty. And so I guess more general questions about the university and the department, which are not research specific. I think it's okay to mention that when you're just starting off your talk, you can just say, oh, something about UNLV or Rutgers or something, right, before you are kicking off your job talk. But I guess you want to be kind of more, if it's a research talk, you want to stick to research and not have jokes about the university and the department in middle of your talk, because I mean, sometimes you may feel that it might help you connect, but if you're going overboard with jokes and kind of anecdotes and stuff in between the talk, I think that probably won't be a great idea. That's probably better during one-to-one interviews. Uh,
Yeah, I would agree, and I would just say if it's organic and it makes sense to integrate some detail, like for instance, I realize that the program has strengths in X, and looking at X in my research, this perspective implies this, right? So that type of deeper level engagement, I think, will win more points than the opening slide, title slide. Joke, if you will, right? So that deeper type of connection, and really just doing your homework, right? What does it mean to be an assistant professor in terms of teaching, research, and service, right? Pick up the faculty handbook if you can. Look around the website. I know you can't get past the intranet with a password, but whatever's open, see if you can get a sense for what it would mean to join that team. And then when you have those types of conversations on the one-to-one, that will set you apart. Those types of conversations you can't really weave in to your job talk. So that's probably the place to do it.
So my feedback would be, I would do some snooping on your own before you go, but you don't say that you're snooping, right? So you check everybody out, you read their CVs, you talk to people maybe, that have been to that program. So you do your own data generation. So when you get there and, you're talking to so-and-so, you've seen their picture, that's, you call them by the right name. You may, like if you have historical knowledge about the program. So our program is in School of Medicine, but it's only been there about 3 years now. And so if I was interviewing, I'd say, wow, tell me a little bit more about how the I don't know if y'all can hear me. Your little things were spinning. If I cut out or not.
Now.
Okay, cool.
For a second.
Okay, cool. So that way it's like I'm providing information about the program, not that I know it all, but enough context they know I've done my research, but then I ask a question, even if I know the answer. So just because you don't have to ask a question necessarily because you're needing the information, but you may be asking the question to be engaging. So just remember the question can serve several functions, and you can ask the same question, perhaps, if fitting, to more than one person, if it fits with the conversation, because your main thing is you want to seem interested, informed, engaged, ready to respond to their questions. And so doing your homework definitely helps. I know we had one candidate that at my former institution that he confessed later, which is fine to do once he got the job, that he basically stalked all of us and he knew like everything about us, which you would never share at the interview. If you're going to do that, just don't share that. Okay. But it helped him feel comfortable because he was very detail oriented and he wanted to seem very engaged. So of course, later that was kind of a funny joke that we had. About how he like gone on social media and, found out more information about us. So I think snooping is good, but you don't have to convey that you're snooping.
And if I could quickly, the point made about asking the same question to multiple people, I think is definitely key. What are the students like at University X? What is it like to be a member of the faculty here, et cetera, et cetera? And you'll get to see the consistency of answers or how they diverge. So, I wouldn't overlook some of those key questions and have a couple in your pocket that you go to that you're genuinely interested in, but you're looking for data triangulation, if you will, right?
Thank you. So usually when we're presenting in person, we kind of have a more of an opportunity to engage our audience, whether that's with our body language or if we're doing engaging activities. Can you speak a little bit about how we can produce that same energy if we are in a virtual platform? Is there any tips or tricks to just keep our audience engaged?
It's already been shared. I'm looking at the link here to the Poll Anywhere. I think that's great. The other thing is, don't be shy to ask for them to engage with you. I was giving a presentation recently to some people outside of my students, and everybody had the black box with their name, and I wasn't shy about it. I said, I'm very interactive. I need you to turn on your video, especially because they were getting credit for this. And they were hesitant. Nobody did anything. And everybody just sat there, and I thought, okay, I'm going to ask again. I think in a job talk, you want to be a little careful that you're not too pushy, but I think if you do it in a fun, creative way, then I think you can really get the buy-in from your audience, and then they'll be able to engage with you. So maybe having an opening, a planning, I don't know. I haven't done a lot of virtual, I have a lot of virtual meetings, but not necessarily presentations. But having some way for them to get involved. So maybe having everybody put something in the chat just to get them going, and to throw out a question. I don't know, just not being scared to just ask them to turn on their cameras or ask them to put something in the chat box would be my kind of thought there. But it is hard. I like being in the room. It's challenging trying to get the same energy. That's what I found, the energy. And I have found that at the beginning, it's harder. Like getting them warmed up and interactive virtually is much harder than in person, because I can walk around, but here I got to get your buy-in really early, or you're just going to tune me out and do something else. So.
Yeah, in terms of keeping the energy up, I had a national presentation with a colleague, and just doing that virtually was a little daunting for me too, because again, I was worried about the interactivity and would I come off as flat in front of the camera. So what I did, and what I'm currently doing right now, I'm at a standing desk and I'm on a balancing board, kind of like a surfboard right now. You can't really tell that until I move around a little bit, right? And that helps me kind of project my voice and get myself in the energy that I want. Also clothing cognition, right? The way you're dressed. Sometimes just wearing pants or dress shoes can help folks, because it's like we all have a Zoom shirt these days, right? So I think that's helpful. Whether you're using Poll Anywhere or any of those QR codes, another easy way to do it could be sharing your PowerPoint presentation and just giving multiple choice. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now put your number in the chat, right? And then just going through that, even if no one's going to turn on their camera and ask you a question or type something in, as some of you've done today, thank you, by the way, you'll be able to at least play off that a little bit.
Yes, so I agree with the points here. So I would also suggest that using the chat box creatively, because sometimes it might not be possible to use other tools in some settings. So let's say the chat box, again, encouraging people to ask questions, and also having some kind of a poll early on when you're introducing your question. So energizing people kind of early on in the talk. Asking people what they expect the answer would be for the question that you're trying to answer. And if you have a surprising element, a twist to the findings, and that would be useful to kind of get them engaged early on. And yeah, so.
Thank you. So when we get to the Q&A period of our job talk, if someone asks us a question and it's not clear, is it okay to ask for clarification? And is there a particular way that this should be done?
I think that's a great question. Being a studier of communication, I watch a lot of misunderstandings on video and we analyze them. And so if they ask you a question and you just don't know the answer, like you're flustered, I think one approach might be, I think what you're asking is this, right? So to rephrase it, what we call formulate the question. First of all, to make sure that you've understood the question. I think that's good. I would do that every time because then you sound like a broken record. But I think if it's a complicated question or a difficult question, I think I would just make sure that you've got it clear before. And then you could say, you know, let's say you don't know the answer. Say, you know, that's a really great question. I honestly don't know, but on my feet. So you want to admit that you don't just have all this information that you're just going to spout off. But my best guess right now would be XYZ, especially if it's about your data set. You don't know it off the top of your head. So you're honest. You are giving them some kind of response. I've heard one candidate say, that's a great question. Let me get back to you. And they answer that to every question. And I was like, wow, I'd be pretty frustrated as a student thinking that I'm going to have to wait a week for my faculty member to get back to me to answer a question. So I could see maybe doing that on a rare occasion. Like if you really are like, you know what, I've never thought of that before. Admit that I've never thought about that. Let me get back to you later in the interview, perhaps. Or just say, you know, right now I can't off the top of my head, but my best guess would be this. And I think that's what the audience really wants to know. Can you think on your feet? Are you bullshitting? Like, are you making up stuff? Because most people can figure that out. And so to be honest, if you don't know, and I think that takes pressure off the presenter because they could ask you anything about, you know, whatever they say, I've got some kind of a response. And being a therapist that studies communication, we have that a lot with training our therapists. They're always like, what do I say next? What do I say? So I think those strategies could be useful in the interview process. The same goes for the one-on-one interviews. You know, I think there's a little less pressure if it's just you and another person or a small group. But either way, I think you could give us and make sure you get back to them, by the way, whether it's during your interview or you follow up with an email immediately afterwards. Which reminds me, a lot of times people afterwards will email all the faculty, thank you so much for the interview. And I think a very brief email of appreciation is fine. But when they start going on and, oh, my dream is to be that, you know, and they kind of really kind of butter it up a bit, it makes me feel like, how am I supposed to respond given that we're still interviewing people? And that is a confidential process, or you can tell they're looking for a decision or an answer. So yeah, I'm gonna stop talking.
So I agree with the point that if you don't know, then you say that this is my best guess or my best possible answer. So admitting is good. And sometimes there are also questions where you have never thought of that question, and it's about related to the data. So you cannot really, without going to the data, you cannot really answer the question. So in that case, also, I mean, you can say that that's a great suggestion. I didn't think of that, and it'll be a great thing to test. And basically, it's always a good idea to have a notepad or something where you write suggestions. So it would obviously it's useful to get suggestions to improve your paper, and also looks serious that you're taking the other person's suggestion seriously. So having a notepad and writing it down, and then getting back to them after the interview, because sometimes you cannot answer certain questions without looking at the data, without going back to the data. So in that case, you admit that that's a great suggestion, and you will look at it, and you will yeah, and that's going to add to the paper a lot, kind of thing. Yeah.
Nothing specific to add other than if you say, that's an interesting question more than once, then that might be a problem. So just, again, the rephrasing suggestion and just showing them that you're taking their question seriously, wrestling with it, and attempting to respond. And again, just the whole idea of contacting afterward, you know, I think that was a good point. Just the search chair is safe, you know. Thank you for, you know, for the interview. This is why I'd be a good fit. Look forward to hearing more. Or if you really built a rapport with one or two people and there was an unanswered question, this is an opportunity to address it very quickly. But again, don't look desperate. Don't be, reaching out. Play it cool.
Just one more thing to add about the question. So let's say you are asked a complex question, you clarify the question, and you provide your best answer. If it is a complicated question, or I think I may have still not quite gotten what the person is asking, I may at the end of my answer say, I hope that addressed what you were asking, and kind of check back in with them. So I think there might be certain types of questions where you want to make sure that your response fit their question, because they may ask one thing, but they're looking for something else. And so I do that sometimes too. I'll say, let me know if that didn't answer. And sometimes they'll say, no, actually, I was wanting to know about such and such. Okay, well, in that case, and then give an answer to follow up. So again, these are just like nuances, but I think having an idea for how to respond, usually students going out to the job market, that's their biggest quote fear is, what if they ask me something I don't know? How am I supposed to be real and honest in myself and yet appear competent? And so I think having strategies for how to respond to questions and how to deal with questions, whether they're in the job talk or they're in the interview process, I think can help you feel a little bit more comfortable.
Thank you. So we have a couple more questions in the chat. First one is it common to have people who have just received their PhD be in a job talk with people who have been in the industry already? Does one have an advantage over the other?
I tried to address it quickly in the chat, but to me, it really depends on the type of position and the type of institution, right? Some fields, practitioners and researchers definitely make up a department. So also keep in mind that you may have advanced assistant professors, those of us in our second and third year that wanted to move somewhere warmer. We might also be interviewing. You'll never know that. And I'm going to share this. I don't know how this is going to go, but some of you know about the jobs wikis, and I used to follow that religiously to kind of get a sense for, my interviews, do I have a chance? And then also afterwards, seeing who ended up landing and getting a sense for, did they have a stronger CV, and trying to do some detective work there. So I think these are just some things to definitely explore.
Thank you. So we have one last question, and it's from a student that's in the science field, and she wants to know if it's usual to talk about the kind of work you will do in the job. So kind of addressing the job posting, and if so, how much should you talk about?
So regarding during the job talk, so obviously during the job talk, you're not going to talk about, I would say in the interviews, you can mention how you'll be, why you are excited about that particular position and how you see yourself fitting into that position. So I would say interviews would be a good time to kind of talk about how you'll be a good fit for that particular position.
I was just going to say a common way to maybe ask and not be presumptuous is, I'm just kind of curious what types of classes might be available to the person that's coming into this position to teach, right? So you're kind of asking and inquiring without assuming. They may ask you, so if you came here, what would you like to teach? What subjects? And you'd say, well, and I think you just be honest. And I don't think that's detrimental if it's not a fit, because sometimes, again, it is about fit. You could have two highly qualified people, and one is just a better fit for the needs of that program. And I think that makes it challenging too, because it's not always just who's the best or most competent or most experienced or the longest CV. Sometimes that's not who gets hired. And I think that can be reassuring that if you've made it to the interview, you're a strong candidate.
Great, thank you so much. So we are nearing the end of our workshop, so we will wrap it up. But before we do, I just wanted to give a huge thank you again to our panelists for sharing your very valuable time with us and giving us this great advice about job talks. And everyone else, have a great day.
Thank you. And good luck in this new age of getting jobs and being virtual. You'll do great. In some ways, it might be easier. You can, it's definitely a different, yeah.
Thank you. All the best.
Thanks. Yes, take care, everyone.
Bye.